here is, I think, a must-do mod. So when you buy the when you buy a ZX14R, by the way, hit like and subscribe. I try to put a lot of content up: knife stuff, gun stuff, car stuff, motorcycle stuff, different brands of motorcycle stuff. We got Ducati, we got Kawasaki, we got what else have I got? Oh yeah, Triumph, plus all the other shit I've had over the years. So there's a lot of good content. Some political stuff. There's something for everyone. Even if you're a commie leftist pinko bastard that's anti-gun and everything else, you may have a love of motorcycles, right? So maybe on that we find our common ground and we could be friends. You never know. Anyway, if you got a ZX14, one of the things that it comes with are kind of crappy tires. The S20s, they weren't that great 3 or 4 years ago when they were brand new, and they're certainly not good now. Didn't like them on track. Were they horrible? Nah. If you're just tooling around, they're fine. If you're going to pick up the pace, they're not good. They're not great. So one of the mods I would recommend is, and you can pick whatever. I happen to go with the Dunlops. If you want Pirellis, if you're a Michelin guy, the brand is less relevant. Go away from the 190/50 to the 190/55. You want the 190/55. I wouldn't go up to a 200. I mean, you can. That just adds weight. I don't know if the rim, I guess the rim's probably designed for a 200. But I stick with the stock width and just go to the 190/55. The 190/50, now, let me preface this, let me back up. If you are just tooling around, or you're an interstate hero, you're a drag racer guy, you just go fast in a straight line, then by all means, keep the 190/50, because it can turn, and it's going to give you better, a little bit, it's a flatter, more round, less peaky tire, so your contact patch in a straight line is going to be a little better. If, however, you want to do some track days on your ZX14, you're going to do more twisties, and you don't care about drag racing, go to the 190/55. What you also want to do is go up one tooth on the rear sprocket. What this will do is it's going to transform the handling of the bike. It's not going to turn it into an R6. It will, however, make a noticeable difference in the handling and cornering of this bike. The 190/55 is a different profile tire. It's taller, it's pointier. Can't do that on the Speed Twin. What it will do is give you a pointier, peakier tire. It'll raise the back end of the bike up about 4 or 5 millimeters, which is not insignificant. That will give you better turn-in. You'll have a little bit nicer grip on the side of the tire. It'll turn in quicker, make it feel a little more agile. You don't have to push it into the turns as much. Going to that taller tire will have the effect of raising the gearing by about, it'd be like going down one tooth on your rear sprocket. Remember, when you lower gearing, your front and backs are opposite. If you want to lower the gearing on a bike by doing a one tooth smaller front sprocket, you'd lower the front. That lowers your gearing. If you want to lower it by the rear sprocket, you go up teeth. It's the opposite, okay? So when you go to a taller tire, it has the same effect of raising the gearing. So what you do is you go to your 190/55 tire, and then you go up a tooth on the rear sprocket. I would recommend doing it all at the same time, because you already got the wheel off, putting the new tire on. So you get that 1 tooth taller sprocket. That'll get you your gearing back, so you're back to stock gearing, basically. So you're not losing any acceleration. Additionally, the next benefit of doing this particular mod as a group is the 1 tooth taller sprocket has a larger diameter. You got to fit more teeth. The spacing has to be the same. So to make room, you have to make a bigger sprocket, slightly. It's only a couple millimeters bigger, but when you then go around the circumference of it, it adds up to like an extra link of chain. So by going to that bigger sprocket, you get your gearing back, and you're gonna, in order to fit the chain onto that bigger sprocket, that slack has to come from somewhere. So what happens, you gotta move the front wheel, or the back wheel, forward about half a centimeter. What this will do is it's shortening your wheelbase. That will make the bike turn in a little bit quicker. Also makes it a tiny bit more wheelie prone, but so when you do all those things, you're getting a better profile for cornering on the back tire. You're keeping your gearing the same by doing the sprocket swap, but that's also forcing you to move your back tire forward, which is shortening up your wheelbase. That's one of the reasons why, you know, if you jump off an R1 or something and you get onto a Boost or a ZX14, yes, there's a weight difference. But once you're rolling along, the weight isn't terrible. You really don't notice it as much. What you do notice in the turns is that longer wheelbase. Makes for great high-speed stability, but it also slows down, you know, part of that is slowing down the steering. So you do all this, you get better grip in the turns while sacrificing a tiny bit of the straight line grip, which again isn't really a problem unless you're just drag racing. But you'll get a better handling bike that will feel more nimble. It will turn quicker. It'll handle a lot nicer than you would think a big girl like this would handle. It already handles better than most people think it does. But those simple mods, and we're not talking about a lot. You get to use the stock spring, stock chain. I got to get around this chowder head. You keep your stock chain, or replace it with the faster gold chain if you want. But by using the same stock chain and the same links, you know, number of links, what that gives you is that shorter wheelbase, better tire profile, lifts the back end up a little bit, puts it on its nose a little bit more, and it makes this thing handle noticeably better. Again, you're not going to turn a ZX14 or a Boost into an R6 anytime soon. Thank you, sir. Slowed down, gave me the wave. But you can hustle a ZX14. You know, all these little things add up. You're not going to get rid of the weight unless you know, lighter wheels and stuff like that. I gotta watch out because there's a diesel spill on this side of the road over there, and then it's going to switch and be on my side of the road. Don't know how old it is. That's always the problem with diesel. That could be a month old and it's not slick, or it could be from Tuesday and it is. But these little things, these are the things you can do to take the bigger, heavier, more comfortable bike and make it flick around a lot better. Like this thing feels awesome. I do notice what some people have talked about, that when you do change the gearing, and I don't know why, because R1s, Ducatis, my Triumphs, any of the new bikes that have ABS and traction control, it's not like the old days where, you know, doing a sprocket swap throws off the speedo. It doesn't do it on this, on most new bikes, because you got individual wheel speed sensors for those other systems. However, when you, on this bike, they said don't go down a tooth in the front, don't gear it down too much, because it does something to this specific, the ZX14R, where it makes like a low speed, low throttle opening stutter. And I don't know why. The traction control light doesn't come on, but I felt it. It's in second gear at like 2-3% throttle, around 5,000-6,000 RPMs. Maybe 5% throttle. It's very low. And so, oh, it dropped 10 degrees. And so there's something going on electronically with this particular bike. If anybody has this bike and knows what it is, ironically, I didn't notice it when I put the bigger tire on it and I geared it up. Most people have said that with a stock bike, you can go up a tooth on the back. You can gear it down that little bit and it won't make a difference, which makes it weird that I'm experiencing it when between the tire and the gear change, my less is changed than just changing the sprocket on a stock bike. So I don't know what it is. Now, it's not bad. It's not like the bike's all herky and jerky or unsafe. It's just something you notice. You know, when you have a big, powerful bike, even small fluctuations in power, you feel it. So now that I know it's there and I know where it is, I've just kind of adjusted to it, and I just ride around it. It's more just for my own edification. I kind of want to know why, and if there's a way to get around it. Maybe I'll reach out to Chris at More Mafia and see if there's something he can do with the ECU flash to get rid of that. Oh, luscious power, endless power. I feel a tiny more zip in the sprocket. It's not tremendous. I'll stop in here, get a BLT, see what's going on. Ooh, got a bunch of bikes today. I gotta know somebody here. And we'll rejoin you in a little bit. Let's see. Can I squeeze in there? No, because I used to have one of those Toyotas. Alright, we'll be back in a bit. Alright, looks like we're back. Had a little glitch, missed some footage, but... So yeah, temperature dropped. It was like 54 at one point. It was 90 the other day. So I'm not as confident in the grip because I know the tires aren't going to get as hot. And you know, going back to our tire discussions, this is where like the sport touring tires, some people are like, oh, you got to have the full-on sport grip, and yeah, under the right conditions, sure. But I'll tell you, on the days when it's in the 50s and 60s, tires like the Road 6 sport touring tire, they grip at a lower temperature. So in the heat of summer, when you can get your Q3s up to 180, 190 degrees, you know, yeah, they're going to be great. Of course, so are the Road 6s. But at days like today, where the temperature is lower, the tires got to get up to temperature before the rubber softens up to the point where you start to achieve your optimal grip and all that kind of stuff. And some of those sport touring tires, like the Road 6, they don't need to be 180, 190. They can be 135. And on days like today, you are much more likely to be in the range of those tires, you know, for those tires, than you will with the full-on super sport tires. So we'll see. I'm going to go a little different route. I normally go Richard Russell, but I've been passing a lot of cops today. I don't know if it's because of Helen, the town of Helen up here, Oktoberfest. All the leafers are up here. All the sport bike guys are coming up, and the car clubs are coming up for, like, you know, one last kind of weekend kind of thing. I don't know. But there was heavy police presence yesterday. And then luckily I was messing around with my camera, so I was going 10 under the speed limit when I think it was Lumpkin County sheriff passed me. I just gave him the wave and kept fussing with my camera, which now appears to be working. It's hard to feel the buttons on the Insta360 through the glove, and I think you can cause a glitch, because like you're pushing the button to start the camera, but you don't think it's pushed, so you immediately push it again, and you end up pushing it like 5 times, and it's like, and it freaks out. So that's the first glitch I've had with this one. So I'm going to stay off Richard Russell today, because I'm going to assume there's going to be cops on it. So we'll go a different route. I don't know one that I've recorded before, but we're going to take this over to Brasstown Bald, which is the opposite side of the mountain from Helen, Georgia. So this is just a kind of a sweepy, nothing, you know, crazy kind of road. And then we'll get to 1775 North, which is kind of like Blood Mountain. Usually there's not a lot of police, so fingers crossed. Hard to do in these gloves, but you get the idea. it was sunny and nice. It's only like a 7% chance of rain or something. And it was gorgeous down in town. But since I've come up here, the temperature's plummeted about 12 degrees. It's very windy. And on a big bike like this, I got a lot of real estate. I got a lot of area on the side to push. Surface area. So, a gust comes along and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm in the other lane. I'm over here now. But still a nice enough day. Probably should have worn my Under Armour, my thermals, if I'd known it was going to be this cold. Alright, get out the way, make the damn turn, lady. Yes, I'm feeling that stutter that they're talking about. I really hope I don't have to go back to my damn stock Sprocket. If I do, what I will do is get a new chain and cut it 2 links short and move the wheel forward that way. Going to the Sprocket was, as I mentioned before, was kind of a twofold intent there. Yeah, right there, it like jumps, it stutters a little bit. It's a weird, right in that range. I mean, I'm barely touching the throttle. Just a little bit of maintenance throttle. I mean, you can cruise along at any speed at like 4% throttle. But right there, I don't think the camera's going to pick it up, but it's like a stuttering right around the 5,000 mark. If I gas it, nothing. It just goes. So it's literally when you're just kind of barely touching the throttle. Seeing some wet spots on the ground. Hoping it's not raining up ahead. If that's the case, we're going to turn my happy ass right around and go back to Blood Mountain. But yeah, like right now, I'm feeling that stuttering. It's not going to upset the chassis or do anything, but it is distracting. I know, I could just drop a gear and pick up my revs, and it seems to be most pronounced in second, not as much in first, and I don't really feel it in third, which doesn't make any damn sense. There's nothing flashing from the traction control, but it's very clearly being a little herky and jerky right there. I cannot imagine what a sprocket would do to cause that. It's not slapping the chain or any of that kind of stuff. It's nothing like that. This is something electronic. And I've heard about it, but I don't know that I've ever gotten to the bottom of it or anybody's definitively said, other than it happens. I don't think they've ever definitively narrowed it down to say, this is how it happens, this is what's going on, and more importantly, you know, here's how you can fix it. I guess if I have to go back to stock gearing and just get a new chain, no, not a big deal. Do that before the track day, because I do like the way the shorter wheelbase feels. For a big bike, it's definitely, it helps make that weight disappear. And I think when I get on track, yeah, the road's getting much wetter up here. We may end up turning around back down to 55 degrees. We'll give it another mile and decide. When it's this cold, I'm not wearing my cold weather gear. I'm wearing my spring and fall gear, which is okay down to like 60s and up to like 80, and then after that I've got to go to my total summer gear. It's much more breathing. But when you get down in the 50s, it's kind of pushing it. The wind chill factor, it's in the 40s right now. Let's see. But yeah, if I gotta go back, I mean, I kept the stock sprocket, so that's not a big deal. It's only $60 for this one. I'll just go get a new chain. I think there was a cop hidden back there. Yeah, like right now, it's that's second gear. If I go to third, well, it's dropping the revs. But if I get up to the same rev range, see if it does it up there. Not feeling it. this, Batman. How could changing the rear sprocket by one tooth, one, which is going to be offset. See, that doesn't make sense, because going to the taller sprocket changed the gearing by basically a tooth. I ran the calculations on Gearing Commander. It gives you right down to the percentages and all that stuff, and how much it impacts your speed and things like that. And so going up a size on the tire was basically like dropping a tooth off the rear sprocket, and I felt no difference. So, but going to a one-tooth smaller sprocket with the taller tire is somehow causing, again, it's not doing it in third. Let me get up to that 5,200, 53 RPM, 5,300. And maybe it's because at that gear, to cruise because of extra wind, because I'm going faster, I've got to give it more throttle. If I drop to second gear, right about here, or is it? It started just like weird stuttering. Now I'm not feeling it. And I'll say, I'm thinking now as I'm kind of going back through my mental Rolodex here. When I did, when I had just the stock bike, there it is. I mean, I'll double check my chain slack, but I'm pretty sure this is what people describe from gearing changes. I really thought I was safe because the tire going up would offset the gearing going down. And it should be a wash. But something's going on, and the ECU is just glitching. But I remember a couple times with the stock tire, stock gearing, even before the ECU flash, when I was going slow around a corner at those speeds in like first gear, I felt a little bit of that stutter. So I think it's just kind of there's an inherent flaw, something with this bike. And it's not just mine, because I know other people have talked about it. And it's barely there. You barely really never notice it unless you have a very sensitive butt dyno. And I tend to be, I say this so it sounds weird, I tend to be very observant with something. Some things I'm oblivious to. But certain things like pattern recognition, noticing the slightest change in something, whether it's people's behavior, something electronic, something mechanical, it's just something I'm very in tune to. I've always been very good at troubleshooting or noticing something's off slightly. People's emotions and things that are probably more important that are right in front of my face, I'll be like 1,000-yard stare right past it and I'll miss it. But these kinds of things, I tend to immediately, I'm like, I may not know what it is initially, but I'm like, something's changed. And it usually could be something really minute. So I did notice it stock. And I'm definitely noticing it at points here. Oh, lovely. Cobra. Nice. Love that color, too. But, can I ride around it and just learn to live with it? You know, some bikes are a little luggy and not as smooth in certain areas. It's not a fueling issue. They can be tuned out that way. See, now I'm not noticing it. It really is a very specific combination of gear, RPM, and throttle input. And it's very narrow. If you happen to just be sitting in that perfect little storm of whatever the hell this thing is doing, you notice it. But as soon as I get out of that range, give it a little gas, it just goes away. Who knows? Whee! Love this bike. So now in my head, I'm like, could I ride around it? Sure. Then I'm thinking, okay, on the track, what gears am I rolling through second at low RPM like that? $5 grand. I don't think any. right there, man. I feel it bucking just a little bit. Alright, I guess I gotta go over to Cycle Gear and see if they got a 530 gold chain. And the right number of links. I don't even know what the number is, I'll have to look it up. If they've got one, I'll just go and get that. I guess I'll go back to stock and just shorten the wheelbase with the chain. I'll need to take some measurements and make sure I've got enough room on there, enough adjustment range to move it forward. Because taking out 2 links is that's gonna bring the wheel forward like a foot. Now that will be a foot. A foot it'd be up in the transmission. It's gonna let me move it forward. I'm trying to think of a link between the pins is about an inch or so. About an inch. But going to the stock sprocket, it's going to put 4.5 millimeters back into it, so maybe 2/3 of an inch forward, maybe 3/4. So I'll have to check that adjustment. I think I'm 25 millimeters from being all in, which is 2.5 centimeters, which is an inch. See, that's going to be cutting it close. Dang it! I want the shorter wheelbase and quicker turning, but I don't know if I can live with that stupid jerkiness. We got enough jerkiness on this bike between the handlebars and the seat. I don't need to add mechanical jerkiness. I'll say when I was riding it, when I got going up 60 before I got to TWO, where I was able to get on the gas a little bit, I didn't really notice it there. It was only on 1 or 2 turns where I slowed down in second gear and was barely giving it any gas. I felt it, like right now. Some people, I know that would really bother them. I think I'm just going to live with it, unless I may take the measurements and I'm really sure I could fit a 2-link shorter chain with the stock sprocket. I think I'm just going to ride around it. One of those things where I'm feeling a little bit of jerkiness, but then I'm like, you know what, that feels like half the early Ducatis I had. You know, the Ducatis that are out now are nowhere near as refined as they were in 06, 07 when I first got into Ducatis. They were still a little rough around the edge. They're beautiful. They were fun, but they're still a little rough around the edges. The cam profiles in the tune that made a V-twin or an L-twin, sorry, rev fairly high for a twin and give you all that top-end power that you want, would make them very lumpy and kind of lurchy down low. Like an 1198 doesn't really want to work under 4,000 RPMs. And you're like, well, the bike only revs to 10.5, so that's a significant portion of the rev range. It's like, yeah, but that's how you get an L twin to have a screaming top end. As screaming as a 10,500 RPM rev limit can be. But the torque curve and the horsepower for twins is usually whoop, and then falls off a cliff, right? So in order to get those motors to be able to, race in World Superbike, the 999, the 1098, 1198, all that kind of stuff, Panigales, everything up to the V4s, they had to cam them properly and come up with some, their desmodromic valves and all that stuff to make it pull hard right up to that rev limiter. The sacrifice was low speed manners, which is why typically on a Ducati L twin, historically, you would always gear them down, because at parking lot speeds around town, sometimes it was hard to go slow enough to get above 4,000 RPMs in first, so that thing would, smooth out. Otherwise, it'd be like a bucking Bronco, and you think this little bit that I'm talking about is annoying. No, you have no idea. That thing would be all over das place. there, but it's, you know what, I'll just pretend I'm riding a Ducati. It's all the precision and performance reliability of the Kawasaki, the Kawasaki, with a little bit of the quirkiness of a Ducati. But yeah, see, typically if you're riding sporty, you're not going to be in that gear at that RPM with only 2,000 or 2 or 3% throttle, unless you're coasting through a turn, a low-speed turn. Oh, it feels glorious. You give it a little gas. What a machine. Quirks and all. Yeah, that's some pretty new pavement. Well, some of it is. Oh, it is a bit chilly. What up? So what do I think of the of it now? Oh, I'm not feeling it now, and I'm giving it just maintenance throttle through some of these old turns. This pavement is really back and forth. I don't know if I should how much I should trust it. I see a lot of oil marks from the tar. I don't feel anything weird, but it keeps transitioning from old pavement to new pavement. I guess they're getting ready to redo the whole road. That'll be nice. Give it a few months. Yeah, I mean, it flicks. I mean, it's a nimble bike for what it is. And these mods have definitely helped it. So I am, for now, going to just live with that little bit of stutteriness. There's a lot of things with bikes that are not perfect. What makes them good in one area makes them a little bit not as good in another. And what do? You just ride around it, whether it's a suspension or how you have to brake, or, you know, within reason, obviously. Instant thrust. Hoping the weather's warm enough for the track day that we can get some decent traction. God, I had this discussion with some dude. One of the YouTube videos I commented on, he was running his tires at like 42 psi, and I'm like, dude, that is the max psi of the tire. Max. That doesn't mean that's what you should run it at. You know, to which then I get some guy on a Goldwing and starts yelling about underinflated tires. I'm like, no, who's, or, you know, overinflated, whatever. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you have to use what's in the manual. I'm like, okay, what if you change to a different brand or style tire? Well, all that matters is if it's the right size, then the pressure applies. I go, so your manual from 9 years ago saw into the future and knows that for the spec tire that was on there, which could be some OEM variation, not even an off-the-shelf version of the tire that you can actually buy. You know, when you look at the recommendations in a manual, they're a recommendation. They're based off of, they don't know how heavy you are. Now, they know the weight of the bike. They know the rough intended purpose of the bike, the style of bike it is, but they don't know you. They don't know if you're going to have a passenger and luggage. They don't know how hard you ride. They don't know how much you weigh. They don't know how much your passenger weighs. So they have to take this all into account and just say, okay, you know what, from a corporate liability and safety perspective, what could we recommend for a tire pressure for this tire, the one that we put on the bike at the factory, so at least we know the specs and the carcass flex and the operating temperature and all that stuff of that tire. What's an average range that should cover most people most of the time? And that's what that is. Same thing with suspension settings. You look in a ZX6R handbook, it'll say this is for comfort, this is how many clicks of rebound and preload, and this is how much preload for sport and for track, and again, the rebound and compression. So this guy's like, no, whatever's in the manual, it doesn't matter what tire you put on there, it's always what's in the manual, that's the right pressure. Meanwhile, that's bullshit. And try to explain to this dude who knows nothing. It gets very frustrating. But maybe it's a lesson and it could be educational for other people. You don't disregard your manual. I mean, there's a fine line between, listening to the people that made the bike, right? But also understand that some of the things that are in an owner's manual are merely recommendations based off of assumptions. Like, how many of us that buy sport bikes have to respring them because we're bigger guys, the springs are too soft? And that's because they make assumptions. When you buy a ZX6R, their assumption is the average weight is going to be probably 165 to 180 pounds. And so the spring rates, and then therefore the damping rates, are all going to be tied roughly to that. And they're going to say, here are some basic settings that are going to get you in the ballpark. What they don't say, what you have to kind of know on the side, is if you fall in that range. A lot of us don't. On 250 pounds with gear, most of the sport bikes I buy, the springs are completely inadequate. If I go and upgrade and put stiffer springs, now the damping may no longer be adequate because the springs are pushing back against the rebound damping. I hit a bump and all my weight goes and mashes the forks into the ground. And then those heavier springs are gonna, boom, push me back. Well, rebound is to slow that so it's not springy, it's not punching me back, it's not bouncing back, it's a slow. Well, when the spring pressure increases by a significant amount, that's what happens is now I may not have enough damping circuit, I may need new cartridges. That's how this shit works, and it's the same thing with tires. And I got this FUD who was sitting there arguing with me that no, doesn't matter what tires you put on there, you go by the manual. I'm like, so if I go buy a set of Pirelli Super Corsa SPs, I should be using the tire pressure recommendations from your owner's manual that could be a decade old for tires that were a sport touring tire. Yeah. I'm like, no. You go to Dunlop or you go to Pirelli and you see what they recommend for your application. And his thought was, well, it's always the same, it's always the same. And it's like, yeah, because you're on a gold wing. You're always going to, because of the weight of the bike, you have a 900-pound bike plus rider. You're driving around with half a ton. Your quote-unquote bike weighs as much as a small house. So yeah, your range is always going to be near the max of the tire. You might add 2 pounds of pressure if you got a passenger, but that's about it. So on that bike, yeah, it may be the manual because no matter what tire you put on there, you're going to have to pump it up towards max to support the weight of the bike. But on a bike like this that's, 300 pounds less, and an R1 that's 450 pounds less, no. You don't run 36 to 38 front, 42 rear when you're sport riding without a passenger. You're an idiot if you do that. Well, it's in the manual. Again, you have to understand that the manual is always based on assumptions, just like suspension settings. There's no serious rider that's racing or doing track days that bought a bike and just says, well, this is what the manual says, so they... I mean, even in there, it tells you how much preload to put in. Well, preload is supposed to be a measurement. How could a manual tell you, oh, 15 clicks of preload? How between sport and comfort? How does it know? How could they know? It's going to be different if you're a 103-pound girl or you're a 250-pound dude like me. The settings are going to be irrelevant. So it's important to understand how these things work. And so many people don't. But then you talk to people, and it's the same arguments we've had about, oh, you can't use a synthetic motor oil to break in your engine, or the rings will never seal, it's too slippery. Never been the case. It's an urban legend. Yet I talk to a lot of old-timers that just, once that shit gets stuck in their head, man, that dog will not let go of that bone. Same thing with, you got to put 200 miles on a set of tires to break them in. No, you don't. You did in the 80s, even the 90s. Not anymore. Especially when they're super sticky, you know, borderline race tires. You know, you got your street aggressive street track day tires, where you're only going to get 1,500, 1,800, maybe 2,000 miles out of them if you're lucky. To have to spend the first couple hundred miles chewing the tires just to get them broken in before you. No, that's not how it works. So why do I argue with these idiots? Because I'm on a crusade to stop the spread of information. It's a public service I do to you. For you. You're welcome. It's important to know how this stuff works. And in some ways, some of it can be a safety thing. Some guy's got a new ZX6R, and some guy's like, oh yeah, you know, put it up at the max, put it up at the 42 PSI. Okay, and you're gonna go out on a cold day. You're not gonna get any freaking heat in your tires, because that comes from the carcass flexing. Different tires want different pressures. Now, will those pressures be impacted by your bike, the particular bike? Again, yes, because if you're on a Goldwing, you have much more weight to support. You're going to need to inflate that tire more to support that bike. But that is not the same as saying that that tire is, you know, the same size, the 180/55 17 size rim Dunlop Q3 Plus, that it's always, you know, that tire's made to operate at a certain range, and it's going to be, when you adjust the pressure, is going to be typically based on weight. If it's on a giant sport touring bike, like this bike, I'm running 36 front, 38 rear, because it's a heavier bike than the R1. On the R1 and other bikes, I would run 34 front, cold, 36 rear. That's what I run on the Triumph. Pumping the tire up to the max is going to make the ride harsher. Your tire is indirectly a part of your suspension system. If it's hard as a rock, it's going to be more bouncy. It's not going to be as compliant. It's not going to absorb the impacts of the road and imperfections and things. It also will not flex much, which means you're not going to get a lot of heat in the tires. If you don't have flex, you don't have heat. If you don't have heat, you do not have grip. The harder tire also isn't going to smash and mash as much where it touches the road, your contact patch. The harder the tire, because you're pumping it up more, it's keeping the tire colder, which is keeping it less grippy, and you're making your contact patch, your connection to the road, smaller. None of those are good for you. All of those things are things that can make the difference between you having a fun day at the track or you riding the crash cart of shame. So, well, that's the track. You know what? Grip and staying upright is not just a track thing. That applies to the road as well. And so when I see people just making really dumb comments like that, it's like, dude, someone else who doesn't know any better, they see you, you look like you're an older dude, you sound confident, they're going to take what you say to heart, and your advice may very well put someone on the ground. Now, I'm not saying underinflate your tires, because there's both extremes. You don't want to go, well, if 42 is too high, I'm going to run them at 22. No. You do that with race tires that have super stiff carcasses, because they have to really, you know, support the bike when you're really hammering the brakes coming into a turn and stuff. There's a lot more of those forces. But you're also running tire warmers. They're also a different compound. There's a lot more going on. We're in the little town of Helen, and it's Oktoberfest. This is where all the Atlanta City folks come up to hang out and see what they think is German. It's a little tourist trap. I mean, it's not a bad town, but it's all this fake stuff. It's like, you go, we're going to go to this German restaurant. You're going to pay $11 for an Oscar Mayer hot dog because they're going to call it a bratwurst or something. Traffic's not too bad. No, Normally it'd be backed up. I would have taken a bypass to go around the town. But it's also not crazy hot, so I'm not impatient. Not at the moment. Actually, the heat coming off the motor at slow speeds is helping warm me up a little. Ooh, we're up to a balmy 64. Need to open up the vents on my jacket for that. Well, it is kind of boring just sitting here. Probably should have taken one of those side streets and gone around. Everyone's got their fake Bavarian hats. It's not a fedora. What is it? Or is it a fedora? I don't know. I'm not a hat guy. I know baseball hats. I know a cowboy hat. I think I know what a boiler cap is. All the wild hogs come up and anyway, yeah, so keep that in mind with your owner's manual. There's a lot of assumptions that get made. They don't know how you're going to ride. They don't know how much you weigh. They don't know any of that stuff. As a bike manufacturer, you got to just say, what's the average? If we want to cover ourselves from liability, these are the springs we'll use. These are the settings. We're going to pick this tire that gives us some of the handling and wear characteristics, but also cost, fits within that price model. And that's another thing people think. They don't even realize, like, you get a bike and it's got a set of tires on it, and then you go buy the same set of tires from Cycle Gear. When they wear out, they're not the same tires. Very often they're an OEM version. They might have less tread depth. They might be a slightly different composition. Ooh, there's a horse right there. I'm gonna move over here. And some dogs. What's up, pups? There's a horse and a bag of poo. I'm not gonna lie, that startled me a little bit. All of a sudden I'm like, what the? Like there's a freaking horse, 1,000-pound horse next to me. Everybody walking around and see some people with lederhosen. Oh, so corny and cheesy. This is what Georgia has to offer. Bunch of people sitting around eating pretzels. Oh, I can smell that horse shit. Gosh, that's more than a 1,000-pound horse. It's not quite like a Clydesdale or a Percheron, but it's bigger than the horses we ever owned growing up. Appaloosas, quarter horse, and a Morgan. Give the horse a wide berth so I don't get kicked. Yeah. This is Oktoberfest. I would hate coming up here to actually do Oktoberfest. Sup? Just come up and buy a bunch of cheap, fake German crap. We're almost through it, people. Almost. This is where I wish I had, like, internet connectivity. I'd say, somebody throw out a topic. Because watching me drive through traffic can't be all that interesting. Alright, I'm going to sign off because I got literally nothing else to talk about. So there's the vlog for today. Maybe next time I'll do a little more show prep. I'm going to go hit some more little twisties on the way home and be back up tomorrow. I'll probably come back on the other bike. So I'm going to need to keep what's left of my tires for the track day. But I needed to do this test because I was curious how I was going to feel with the shorter wheelbase and the Sprocket. Was it going to do the stuttering? I had my fingers crossed. It's still doing it, but I think I'm just going to live with it for now. Unless Cycle Gear has a chain in stock. So, anyway. Hope you enjoyed. If not, sorry. I'll try to be more interesting next time. But take care, everybody.